My esteemed friends, welcome to my channel. I am Alexander Musyenko. Today is March 27th, and this is my traditional briefing for you on the events that I consider relevant, important, and worthy of your esteemed attention. As usual, there is plenty to talk about. The fact is, we see that Russia continues its terrorist strikes on Ukrainian territory. It is evident that the enemy has changed the tactics of and they will rely more on Shahed drones, depending more on drones after the Ukrainian Defense Forces managed to carry out a successful, so far the most successful, attack of 2025 according to British intelligence, and destroy Russian air-launched missiles, ground cruise missiles with which the enemy shelled the territory of Ukraine, in the area of the Engels 2 airbase, where Russian strategic aviation is based. After this, it is evident that Russia is more actively using Shahed drones and overall is betting on drones. With the exception of some cases where they use ballistic missiles, in specific instances, the enemy will now primarily focus on this. Specifically on the latter, it is evident that the air war is changing. It will transition to a stage where Russia will launch more drones. They are creating more launch platforms. We'll see how much this will provide them with opportunities, because no one is just idly watching the launch platforms. And from time to time, they are simply destroyed so that the enemy cannot feel at ease. And our Ukrainian defense forces are working to destroy a greater number of Shaheds, among other things, by shooting them down. But also by using electronic warfare means, although the drones fly lower. This is especially a threat to large cities where there are high-rise buildings and where these drones they actually crash into apartment buildings. In other words, Russia has moved to even more open terror. They have always been involved with terrorists, and now it's outright terror, with drones being launched specifically at cities. We see that last night, Kharkiv, Dnipro. We see that the enemy is delivering these targeted strikes because they need a visual impact. They want to pressure Ukraine. They want to demoralize the Ukrainian people and force concessions. While the United States of America is contemplating what to do with Russia, how else they can appease Putin, we now see that they are imastoputi, even considering lifting sanctions. At least this was stated by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who mentioned that, according to his version, a ceasefire in the Black Sea could occur after a review of sanctions against Russia. In 13, just a solution from the family's feeder bank. Patrushev, that is, well, they want to support Patrushev so that they can earn more and, in addition, finance the war. So while they are thinking about this, we see that Russia is carrying out terrorist attacks, and evidently in the future the enemy will rely less on their strategic aviation and missile strikes. Producing them is more expensive, a trend if we look at the math and statistics towards increasing missile production. At least I'm talking about the statistics about those launches that occurred earlier when the enemy was striking. There is no visible trend that Russia has increased its missile production, and has significant capabilities for this. As of today, it is not visible today, so they will focus on drones, as drones are cheaper. And unfortunately, they still have access to these technologies. As rightly noted by the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, Iran taught Russia very correct words of the Supreme Commander in the sense that these issues need to be combined, because today we see that the position of the Trump administration in the USA is increasingly growing against Iran. We see that Iran has not yet responded to these US proposals for negotiations on abandoning its nuclear program and effectively reducing the production and enrichment of uranium. And thus, the situation, in fact, as of today, is that the US will continue strikes on Yemeni Houthis. Accordingly, something will need to be done with Iran. Iran is not yet entering any negotiations and is testing Trump's patience to see how far he will go. Well, this is also predictable because if the US does not demonstrate leadership and strength against Putin and Russia, then all other potential adversaries of the United States will behave very complacently and will act accordingly, in such a way that they basically don't care. And for them, the US is no longer a leader, and Trump is not someone to be feared. This is how they will behave, and anti-American sentiments will only continue to grow. Therefore, there is a question here. And of course, the combination of this axis of evil drawing a line between Russia and Iran, especially when we are talking with the United States, is an absolutely correct strategy chosen by the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, and Russia. The Muscovites predictably accuse Ukraine of violating the ceasefire agreement. They claim that on the night of March 26th, Ukrainian drones allegedly attempted to strike some targets on the territory of occupied Crimea and beyond, claiming that the targets were energy facilities and that Ukraine is already violating. Did we have any doubts that the Kremlin would manipulate, lie, and accuse? Sky News calculated that since the beginning of 2014, from the start of Russia's aggression against Ukraine, Russia has violated 190 agreements. Here's the statistics for you. And accordingly, please tell me, can they be trusted? Of course not. They can only be forced to comply with demands, and they can only be forced by strength. Who is currently demonstrating strength against Russia and fighting? The Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian military, Ukraine's defense forces who continue to destroy the enemy. Here's just one episode for you. In the past day, the enemy tried to reach the outskirts, Sturecka. They tried to break through there, tried to establish themselves, but these attempts were futile. The attacks were repelled and the enemy was pushed back. Kharkiv region does not allow the enemy to advance. Successful strikes are being carried out in the Belgorod and Kursk regions, where the enemy is concentrated. That is, Ukraine continues to destroy the enemy, reducing its potential. And despite all this, the defense forces of Ukraine will continue to act, and we will support our army. As such, a single effective support and guarantor of our security, so that, well, we perfectly understand that against the backdrop of what is happening now, for example, here, a publication by Reuters indicates, citing their sources, that supposedly Europe is already considering the decision to send its troops. Why is that? Because they are looking towards Washington and waiting for a decisive position from the White House? And there, in the White House, according to Reuters in Washington, American officials are already starting to smile and laugh at this idea. According to reports by Reuters, and do not support it, President of Ukraine Zelensky is doing everything he can. He is fighting, demonstrating leadership qualities during his visit to France and meeting with French President Emmanuel Macron. He speaks clearly about the fact that we need a contingent. And these are not just peacekeepers, these are troops that, among other things, by being stationed on the territory of Ukraine, should serve as an additional tool and guarantee to deter Russia, so that Putin does not start or conduct military actions. And this is absolutely correct. This is the right strategy development. Well, and France responded to us. The president of France, Macron, announced that they are allocating 2 billion euros in aid and promised to deliver more aircraft, Mirage, and weaponry, including artillery, Caesar, shells, ammunition, and joint weapons production. There are projects being implemented jointly with France. I will tell you, dear European partners, give us more investments in joint projects in weapons production, specifically on the territory of Ukraine, in secure locations where it can be done to increase production, and the ability to use and apply this weaponry in the fight against the enemy. And I believe that the result will be noticeable. This will also be a guarantee of security. So, while our European partners will be discussing today, March 27th, at the next meeting within the coalition of the willing, the issue of possible troop deployment, about increasing and providing Ukraine with larger aid packages, about our support. Ukraine's defense forces continue to carry out tasks and destroy the enemy. And we must not forget that precisely our drone industry, along with our long-range drones and capabilities, they are only increasing and growing, and I hope that this will continue to be the case. And it must be understood that if Russia continues the terror, if Russia is not ready for a ceasefire and demonstrates this with strikes on Kharkiv, Dnipro, in Sumy, Kherson, Zaporizhia, Kiev, Kropivnitsky, Odessa. I have not listed all the settlements yet, and this is only the large Kryvyi Rih. What actually happened was over the course of 1.5 to 2 weeks, terrorist attacks by the enemy on cities. I believe that our defense forces will find a way to respond to the enemy's military targets to make them burn. We have already seen the largest drone attack since the beginning of this year on the Moscow region. I think that eventually there are still many targets there that need to be hit again. This needs to be done to demonstrate that the enemy cannot act with impunity, as they are doing. Ukraine is demonstrating steps and readiness for a ceasefire. This is our position, but I think no one will just sit back and watch what is happening, and there will be a response as well. And by the way, speaking of responses, and now, literally just appeared in these seconds while I am talking to you and recording this video for you. Official information from the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. They have received updated information about the Ukrainian Defense Forces strike on March 20th on the Russian Air Force base Engels 2. So, the enemy lost 96 air-launched cruise missiles, including due to secondary detonation. These means of attack were intended for 3 missile strikes during March-April of this year. That is, at least 3 strikes. The Russian strikes were postponed. And this is, of course, a very significant success, almost 100 missiles. This is truly something to be proud of. And it is an example of how our Ukrainian defense forces operate and let the enemy not relax. Because again, I think such strikes will be repeated. After all, there is no limit to records. As noted by British intelligence, the largest and most successful strike. Why not try to surpass these achievements? I think we have all the chances and opportunities considering our growing capabilities. This is also very important to understand. Well, friends, an almost detective story is unfolding these days in Lithuania. The fact is that there was information from Lithuanian media. Initially, just during NATO exercises in Lithuania, 4 American servicemen went missing, along with a tracked armored vehicle. They disappeared, and now some Lithuanian publications, such as the Baltic News Service and Delphi, report that they might be dead or even already found dead. And the abandoned vehicle, they were found not far from the border with Belarus. And it leads, according to information directly from the Baltic News Service, behind their deaths might stand. You were thinking, I think the answer is obvious, Russian and Belarusian special services. That is, it is evident that it might be about them, stumbling upon some kind of sabotage and reconnaissance group ambush. Because we understand that Russia perceives the Baltic countries as the next targets for continuing its aggressive policies in Europe, for continuing and scaling up aggression in Europe. And it is possible that this is precisely the reason. It will be very interesting to follow the circumstances of the investigation, wouldn't you agree? Well, it's a very serious detective genre, and one wants to wait for it. Reactions from the USA. Well, what will they say? In fact, directly about this, it is very interesting whether they will somehow justify themselves or if they will actually talk about the possibility of being involved. The Russians, and this is practically the activation of Article 5, meaning it is already an attack on a NATO country and the killing of American servicemen on the territory of a NATO country. This is what the threat directly to Americans is about. The situation is very serious if approached, however. This is when we talk about NATO's Article 5. Does it apply because, for example, the former commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine And now the ambassador of Ukraine to the United Kingdom, General Zelensky, noted that there is no Article 5. In one of his speeches, he said directly, there is no Article 5 in NATO, and noted, this is a direct quote, Mr. Zelensky received calls from Romania asking him not to say that missiles had fallen there. They said, why did you activate the drones? They flew to us. And I said, shoot them down, you have 40 F-16s. Absolutely correct words and position. Valery Zaluzhny, what should be done in this situation? You have planes, shoot them down, what's the problem? Furthermore, Mr. Zaluzhny says the Baltic countries understand that there is no Article 5 of NATO about collective defense, and there never was. Poland understands this. Where periodically either our missiles or Russian ones fall, the community understands everything, just remains silent, and indeed, that's how it is. Remember the situation that occurred when missile debris first fell on Polish territory as a result of a Russian attack. As a result of Russian missiles flying towards Polish territory and falling directly somewhere on the border, attacking Ukrainian targets, I remember very well when there was a very decisive reaction. The president of Poland, Andrzej Duda, he convened the National Security and Defense Council, began raising these issues, and started calling for decisive actions, emphasizing the inadmissibility of such Russian attacks. And at that time, it was discussed that the incident should be classified as an attack on a NATO country, nothing else, just like that. And now what? And then what happened? There was a call from Washington where it was essentially emphasized that the incident should not be classified in such a way. And we saw that the position of the Polish President Duda began to change somewhat. And it started to change precisely because, in fact, obviously they did not want to, NATO countries. And then Poland even proposed a scenario in which, well, the Poles got tired of it. And they turned to Brussels and asked NATO headquarters to help in the interpretation and qualification of certain actions, attacks, in order to show and say when we should respond. What is considered an attack, and when should Article 5 on collective self-defense be applied? Well, actually, they wanted to get an answer to these questions. But if I'm not mistaken, to this day, there are, unfortunately, no official responses from there. Well, actually, that's the situation. So what does this tell us? We need to strengthen alliances with those who understand us. As of today, this is the axis from north to south. As the distinguished son of the Ukrainian people, Yuri Lipa, wrote, Ukrainian geopolitical orientations are not from east to west, but from north to south. And it will continue. The danger for Ukraine will persist as long as this aggressive neighbor looms from the northeast. Therefore, the aggression will stop when Moscow ceases to be a neo-imperial center. This is very important. And from north to south, this includes Britain, the countries of Northern Europe, Scandinavia, the Baltic states, Poland, and Ukraine. Furthermore, Turkey should also strengthen ties with them in the Black Sea. This country is very important, and in principle, they might sometimes make statements and try to maintain ties with Russia, but for Ukraine, they are doing practically everything necessary. This is what we need to do. Well, and the situation in the United States of America is not calming down. I think the scandal might be escalating and growing concerning the messenger signal and regarding the fact that Donald Trump's national security advisor, Mark Waltz, shared all the data there regarding the attacks on Yemeni Houthis, including the planes that are supposed to fly and the locations where strikes are to be made. I think this situation might still have consequences and it will be investigated and heard. Obviously, in Congress, Donald Trump's opponents got an opportunity to make a fuss about something. Now, Trump has his own email. Well, essentially a scandal, like Hillary Clinton had, which representatives constantly. And Trump's team and Trump himself criticized the former Secretary of State for using her own private email for official correspondence. So Here we see now that there could essentially be a scandal that representatives of the Democrats will always latch onto, and remind Trump and the Republicans that they used the signal messenger and essentially shared classified information there. After all, information about the flights of American fighter jets, about intentions to carry out strikes, can put the lives of those pilots who are carrying out the mission at risk. This is absolutely obvious. And that is precisely why, of course, there could be talk about the fact that there might be additional investigations, there might be questions that will only increase and escalate. Well, I think one of the reasons why Donald Trump decided to declassify the materials of the case concerning possible connections between his campaign team and Russia, in 2016, the US president instructed the American FBI about this. So in fact, I think one of the reasons why this is being done right now, this is an attempt to divert informational attention, to shift the focus away from this situation with the group chat in Signal, and the attempt to demonstrate that supposedly back then, in 2016, baseless investigations were conducted, and the accusations against Trump's team were allegedly unfounded. And there was no evidence of his connections with Russia. He wants to demonstrate openness here, but there is another trend, which is somewhat threatening to us. It lies in the fact that in this way, Donald Trump might take certain steps to supposedly not demonize Russia and show that allegedly there could have been no interference, that Trump does not experience any pro-Russian interventions, that he still remains, let's say, absolutely autonomous, sovereign in making his own decisions and so on. Well, I mean, there are different motivations here perhaps, but one of them is to interrupt. An informational pretext is possible, which will now unfold and expand and may grow into a more significant scandal directly related to this. This pertains to the correspondence in Signal. Well, and you have probably already heard, in fact, I consider this a revelation, especially from Trump's team, because John Ratcliffe, the CIA director, he was appointed precisely by the nomination of the American president, and he clearly stated that Ukrainians should not be underestimated, that the Ukrainian army is underestimated. And if Ukraine is not satisfied with the conditions of the truce and ceasefire and peace, they can continue to fight even with bare hands. We do not want to do this. We want to create modern, innovative weapons, but still, this is the recognition. Meanwhile, Bloomberg reports that the US intelligence community has released an assessment indicating that Russia and Ukraine are likely to choose to continue a prolonged war rather than settle for an unsatisfactory agreement. The report notes that both sides consider the risks of a prolonged conflict to be less than the various risks of a compromise settlement. We see that Russia is definitely continuing the war, Russia continues its terror, and therefore Ukraine will respond. Therefore, the defense forces will work to continue delivering painful blows to the enemy. No one will be lenient with them, and we are friends. Despite everything, with confidence and God's help, we are moving forward. Please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and write your comments. I read them, I see them, and I greatly appreciate and respect them. This feedback is truly important to me. So, please write and leave comments. Take care of yourselves. Glory to Ukraine.